Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel NPA Discovery, and here we tell stories a little differently. We don't just recap headlines. We break them down, we challenge the popular narrative, and we pull out lessons that actually matter, especially the ones people don't like to talk about. Today's title is provocative on purpose: Paul Walker, the image we loved, and the truth we avoided. And I want to be upfront about my stance before we begin. I agree with part of the way the world remembers Paul Walker. A charismatic actor. A genuine car enthusiast. And someone who built real humanitarian impact through disaster relief. But I also disagree with the idea that we should turn a human being into a flawless statue after tragedy. Not because we want to disrespect the dead, but because we learn nothing from perfect stories. And the moment we stop being honest about complexity, we stop being honest about life. So in this video, I'm going to do two things at the same time. 1. Honor what deserves honoring, especially his charitable legacy. 2. Examine the uncomfortable parts, carefully, responsibly, and with context. Before we get into it, if you value documentaries that combine storytelling plus analysis, please like, subscribe, and share this video. It's the simplest way to support the channel, and it tells YouTube to recommend more content like this. If you want more long-form stories, your engagement is the signal that makes it possible. Alright. Let's start where the public story begins, and then we'll talk about what stayed out of frame. The clean-cut myth: why Paul Walker felt safe to love. For many people, Paul Walker wasn't just an actor. He felt like a symbol. He was the early 2000s version of effortless cool, approachable, athletic, handsome, calm. In the Fast and Furious era, he became the face of a kind of modern American fantasy: fast cars, brotherhood, loyalty, and a life where adrenaline feels like purpose. But what made him especially easy to love wasn't only his roles. It was the sense that he was private. He wasn't constantly selling his personal life. He didn't seem to crave controversy. And in celebrity culture, privacy often gets interpreted as integrity. But privacy can mean different things. Sometimes it's maturity. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's protection. And sometimes, it's strategy. In Paul Walker's case, that quietness around romance has been described as keeping things under wraps. And as we'll discuss later, some media reports argue he had reasons to avoid romantic scrutiny, especially after public attention began to grow around the age gaps in his relationships. We'll handle that carefully and specifically, with sources. First, though, you can't understand why privacy mattered until you understand how his career was built. A child star without the child star trauma branding. Paul Walker was born in 1973 in California, and he started acting very young, commercials first, then television work. Here's something people often misunderstand about child actors: most child actors aren't famous. They're working. It's auditions, rejection, waiting rooms, short roles, small checks, and the constant experience of being evaluated by adults. Paul Walker's early credits included TV work that didn't make him a star, more like a steady climb through the industry's lower levels. He eventually landed a role on the sitcom ROWW, where he played Jeremy Beatty during the first season. The show didn't last long, and it didn't launch him into household name status. But it gave him something important: industry fluency, the ability to function on set, to deliver, to be reliable. And reliability is the quiet superpower that keeps a working actor employed long before fame shows up. Fast and Furious: when a role doesn't just pay you, it names you. The origin story of the Fast and the Furious has been told in many ways over the years, but the core idea is this: it blended undercover law enforcement tension with street racing culture. When the film finally came together, Paul Walker landed the role of Brian O'Connor, the character that would define him globally. The film worked because it hit something deeper than cars. It gave audiences a chosen family story, loyalty under pressure, masculinity framed as responsibility, and danger framed as identity. And then there was the chemistry, especially with Vin Diesel. That chemistry didn't stay on screen. They became close, and Diesel later became Meadows' godfather and remained publicly connected to the Walker family. Now, I want to pause and say something important about public friendships. Celebrity friendships are often dismissed as PR. But sometimes they're real, and what makes them real is what happens after tragedy. Plenty of people disappear once the cameras stop. The relationships that remain, especially around family, tell you something. That bond becomes part of Paul Walker's legacy narrative, and it matters because it contrasts sharply with the part of the story that people prefer not to discuss, the private romantic life. We'll get there. But first, we need to cover something else that was undeniably real: his humanitarian work. A child star without the child star trauma branding. Paul Walker was born in 1973 in California, and he started acting very young, commercials first, then television work. Here's something people often misunderstand about child actors: most child actors aren't famous. They're working. It's auditions, rejection, waiting rooms, short roles, small checks, and the constant experience of being evaluated by adults. Paul Walker's early credits included TV work that didn't make him a star, more like a steady climb through the industry's lower levels. He eventually landed a role on the sitcom ROWW, where he played Jeremy Beatty during the first season. The show didn't last long, and it didn't launch him into household name status. But it gave him something important: industry fluency, the ability to function on set, to deliver, to be reliable. And reliability is the quiet superpower that keeps a working actor employed long before fame shows up. Fast and Furious: when a role doesn't just pay you, it names you. The origin story of the Fast and the Furious has been told in many ways over the years, but the core idea is this: it blended undercover law enforcement tension with street racing culture. When the film finally came together, Paul Walker landed the role of Brian O'Connor, the character that would define him globally. The film worked because it hit something deeper than cars. It gave audiences a chosen family story, loyalty under pressure, masculinity framed as responsibility, and danger framed as identity. And then there was the chemistry, especially with Vin Diesel. That chemistry didn't stay on screen. They became close, and Diesel later became Meadows' godfather and remained publicly connected to the Walker family. Now, I want to pause and say something important about public friendships. Celebrity friendships are often dismissed as PR. But sometimes they're real, and what makes them real is what happens after tragedy. Plenty of people disappear once the cameras stop. The relationships that remain, especially around family, tell you something. That bond becomes part of Paul Walker's legacy narrative, and it matters because it contrasts sharply with the part of the story that people prefer not to discuss, the private romantic life. We'll get there. But first, we need to cover something else that was undeniably real: his humanitarian work. Were they racing? Why the public wanted that answer? Almost immediately, speculation spread: street racing, reckless behavior, the Fast and Furious lifestyle spilling into real life. That speculation makes sense emotionally, because humans hate randomness. We would rather believe tragedy has a story. But this is where we need maturity as viewers. A tragedy doesn't become meaningful because we attach a dramatic narrative to it. Sometimes it becomes meaningful only when we accept the plain reality. In litigation and reporting that followed, courts and investigators repeatedly emphasized speed as central, rather than mechanical failure being proven as the cause. That leads us to the next chapter: what happens when a franchise built on brotherhood loses one of its defining faces mid-production? Real-life story: why public grief feels personal. Let me give you a real-life example. If you've ever had a song tied to a specific time in your life, your first job, a breakup, a long drive home late at night, then you understand how art becomes a time machine. When someone dies and a tribute song plays, it isn't just about them. It triggers your own timeline. You remember who you were when you first watched those movies. You remember the people you watched them with. You remember your own sense of possibility. So when the tribute happens, people cry for multiple reasons at once. That's why the farewell in Furious 7 became more than a scene. It became a shared emotional checkpoint. After the tears, lawsuits, settlements, and what was publicly reported. When a high-profile death happens, legal action is almost inevitable, not because families are greedy, but because wrongful death law is one of the only systems society has to answer the question, what happened, and who carries responsibility. Two major threads entered public reporting. Settlement with the driver's estate. Time reported that Meadow Walker received a $10.1 million settlement from the estate of Roger ROWW, the driver, with funds placed into a trust. B. Settlement with Porsche. ABC News reported that Meadow Walker and Porsche resolved the lawsuit and kept the terms confidential. ABC also noted Porsche settled a separate lawsuit filed by Walker's father. A federal judge, in litigation related to the crash, also ruled in a key case that Porsche was not responsible, again emphasizing the significance of speed and insufficient proof of a defect causing the deaths. Now, to be careful, legal outcomes are not the same as moral conclusions. Courts decide based on evidence thresholds, causation standards, and specific claims, not on emotional narratives. But the broad takeaway is this: when tragedy happens at high speed, the legal system becomes a second arena where grief, accountability, and money collide, often painfully. Why the Fast and Furious Brotherhood narrative endured. The reason the franchise endured after Walker's death is the same reason it worked before. It wasn't actually about cars. It was about belonging. The family theme, often mocked, was emotionally effective because modern life is isolated. People are lonely. People crave loyalty. People crave chosen bonds. Walker and Diesel represented an idealized male friendship, emotional, loyal, protective, without being sentimental in a way mainstream audiences reject. And Diesel's public comments over the years have continued to frame Walker as family, including honoring him in personal ways. That narrative is why the next development matters so much. The 2027 question, Brian will return, what was said. In mid-2025 reporting, Entertainment Weekly described Vin Diesel announcing that Fast X, Part 2 is planned for April 2027, and that Brian O'Connor would return. This is significant, not only as a franchise move, but as a cultural question: should a deceased actor's character be brought back through doubles, archival footage, and digital recreation? There are two competing ethical instincts here. Instinct A, don't touch it. Leave the goodbye intact. Let the tribute stand. Don't reopen grief. Instinct B, let the character live. If done respectfully, with family approval and careful limits, allow the character to complete the story in a way audiences and loved ones can accept. Neither instinct is automatically right. The deciding factor is always the same: intent plus execution. Is it done for story and closure, or purely for revenue? Is it done with dignity, or as a gimmick? And, practically, the how matters too, because a bad digital recreation can feel disturbing rather than comforting. Real-life example: digital afterlife is already here, not just in movies. Let me ground this with a real-life example. Right now, ordinary people are facing a version of this question through technology. Old voicemails replayed after someone dies. AI-generated voice tools that can mimic loved ones. Social media profiles that keep posting memories. We are entering an era where death doesn't fully end someone's presence. And that can be healing, or deeply unsettling. So when a franchise brings back a character played by a deceased actor, it isn't just entertainment. It's a public experiment in how society processes grief in the digital age. What this story is really about: speed as a metaphor. Now I want to shift from events to meaning. Because the obvious moral of Paul Walker's story is, drive safely. That is true, and it should be said clearly: high speed reduces control and increases consequence. But if we stop there, we miss the deeper metaphor. Paul Walker's life, and death, sits at the intersection of ambition, adrenaline, fame, masculinity, and meaning. And the question becomes, how fast can you live before your life outruns your values? That question isn't about cars. It's about everything. How fast are you moving in your career? In your relationships? In your habits? In your temper? In your need to be admired? Because speed can feel like purpose, right up until it becomes the thing that destroys you. The climax, the difference between a life that looks good and a life that is good. Here is the emotionally difficult truth. Paul Walker's story is moving partly because it ended before a full, third act could happen. He didn't get decades to evolve in public, to correct mistakes, to redefine himself away from the image, to show what growth would have looked like. And that forces the rest of us to do something uncomfortable. We have to hold two truths at once. 1. A person can do meaningful good. 2. A person can also carry patterns that deserve scrutiny. When you hold both truths, you stop worshipping humans and you start learning from them. And that is the only kind of admiration that makes you wiser rather than blind. The empowering ending, a message for anyone who feels behind and wants to speed up. So here's how I want to end this, climactically, honestly, and with power. If you're watching this and you feel behind in money, behind in status, behind in your life plan, you may feel the temptation to speed up. To take shortcuts. To chase adrenaline. To prove yourself quickly. To live louder so nobody notices you feel uncertain inside. And I'm telling you, that temptation is real. But here is the lesson Paul Walker's story offers: if we're brave enough to accept it, you don't need to go faster. You need to go deeper. Go deeper into discipline, responsibility, the relationships that actually matter, the work that survives when attention disappears, the choices that you won't regret when the adrenaline is gone. Because the goal is not to be remembered for motion, the goal is to be remembered for meaning. And meaning is built slower than hype. It takes patience. It takes humility. It takes character. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: don't confuse speed with direction. Don't confuse excitement with purpose. Don't confuse being loved by strangers with being known by the people who matter. Drive your life like it's precious, because it is. And if you're in a season where you feel pressure to race, let this be your permission to slow down without feeling like you're losing. Because sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is not accelerate. It's to choose control. It's to choose values. It's to choose a life that doesn't end in a headline. Thank you for watching. If this video gave you something real to reflect on, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what does going deeper, not faster, look like in your life right now?